This is the Digital Shelf Insider podcast of MetricsCart. Hi, all. Welcome back to the Digital Shelf Insider podcast of MetricsCart. I'm your host, Shreshta, and today we have Carla El Gawly joining us. She is the Global Head of Digital Shelf Solutions at ICP. A very warm welcome to you, Carla, and so thrilled to have you.
Thank you very much, Shreshta. Joy to be here today.
Yeah. So, most of us end up in an e-commerce role by accident. We would love to know your story. How has it been, and what are the cool stuff that you've done in your career?
Yeah, definitely. So, I actually studied law and took a completely different turn when I started my career. And I almost accidentally fell into working in tech. So, I was out in Sydney, Australia, and worked for a company called Rocked. So they were kind of at the forefront of thinking about how programmatic advertising could help brands acquire new customers or present offers in a post-transactional space. So back then when I joined, it was a really true startup and a great way to kind of learn about how advertising technology works. I joined as their first account manager and over the years grew that team and built out that arm of the business. So working with global brands such as hotels.com, Expedia, Ticketmaster, and then on the other side, kind of the transactional brands that might ask for kind of, would you like to join our newsletter type thing. So I did that as the start of my career, and then I joined Bazaar Voice. So that's really where I started to go more away from the advertising space, but more into the content and e-commerce space. So focusing on user-generated content. And there I had a strategic role around managing enterprise brands and then on to enterprise and strategic retailers. So thinking about how consumer-generated content helps that customer go through the journey and make purchase decisions. I then went on to work for Yext. So thinking about that consumer journey, how do consumers start in search and how do brands then optimize the type of content to pull the consumer through the purchase funnel to product page and beyond. And then most recently, prior to ICP, I led Salsify's European strategy around go-to-market and retail. So that's where I started to get into really thinking about product content and information from a technology storage perspective and a distribution of that content. So end-to-end kind of journey around vendor side. I then started to delve into more of a consulting role. So taking the idea of we know consumers start and end their journey and content plays a critical role in that. And helping brands build out a strategy around digital shelf from a content perspective, which led me to ICP, where I now lead their solution line around digital shelf. So ICP are an agency that specialize in content. In their inception 36 years ago, they started as a content production agency. So really at the forefront of building out content at a time when digital assets became more and more important. They then segued into digital asset management and now growing their business more into the PIM PXM space, which is the area that I'm leading. So my career has been mostly vendor side, some consulting, and now I'm sitting in an agency role thinking about how do we partner with vendors and how do we marry the services that agency offers to brands so that they get the most out of technology.
This is so amazing. So nice to know that you worked both on the tech side as well as a more strategy oriented side. So on that, I would like to ask, like, so there's an overemphasis about tech to optimize the digital shelf presence. But there are also these non-technical elements a brand needs to consider. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I think there's often this misconception, and this really applies to many technologies. But if we think about PIM and PXM technologies, companies find themselves with a huge amount of product content that they need to both manage effectively, enrich it, and distribute it. And there's often this belief that if they buy a piece of technology that helps them essentially do that, then all their problems will be solved. But technology alone is not a full program or a strategy that involves other parts of the business. So I like to think of it in four buckets. So technology is one of them. Then you've got the process, so the end-to-end actual flow of content from its inception through to the consumer or customer of that brand. You've got the data piece, which is critical. A lot of brands, when they go about thinking about purchasing PIM or PXM technology, a huge part of that implementation process is to ensure that the data is in the right structure, finding that data even within a business. If you think about huge global organizations where content lives on people's hard drives, it was on someone's, they owned an Excel somewhere, and it's piecing together that full vision of a product. So that's your data piece. And then really, really importantly is the people piece. So a technology serves a purpose, but it has to be owned and collaborated along with actual people across the business that are able to feed it with data and use it as a user, and also define like which parts of the business it's invested in it, should touch it, should be beneficiaries of it. So without those four pillars working in conjunction, you don't really have a scalable product content program, I like to call it. One of those in isolation serves a small purpose, but you'll often find most brands will have one of those areas that they would like to improve. And that's really kind of the consulting work that I'm involved in and the services that ICP start to offer to brands.
Interesting. You said a lot of work is about piecing content and data and parts of it all together. So, how can brands assess their current maturity level on a digital shelf, or what steps can they take to understand where they are and where to go ahead?
Absolutely. So I actually wrote a maturity assessment for ICP, which launched last year. And that maturity assessment is a free of charge tool, essentially, for a brand to go in and do exactly what you just asked, which is figure out where they're lacking or where they're doing well across this end-to-end program. So thinking about the tech, the process, the people, and the data. And the way the assessment works is it questions key components of each of those four buckets in order to say, okay, well, if you were leading, then you would be doing XYZ. And if you were aware, which is kind of that first stage as we've defined it, you'd be answering the questions in a certain way. The output of that assessment then gives them an overall stage of where they are, but also a stage of where they are within any of those buckets. So let's say a company's doing amazing from a tech perspective. So they're utilizing all the latest features of their PIM or PXM. It's embedded in the right parts of the business from a technical perspective. So they're leading there, but actually when it comes to the people, they don't really have ownership. There's no cross collaboration. And so they're still developing that. So we take them through aware, developing, practicing, optimizing, and leading. And that kind of allows brands to then pinpoint, okay, if this is an area that I'm falling behind on, what steps can I take? And the assessment output will give them some kind of recommendations of where to focus.
Right. I think it's the need of an hour also that, there are frameworks of such sorts so that they get a full picture of where they are, where they need to head. Um,
Mhm.
so coming to the fact that attention often precedes conversion, and how do brands design product pages and kind of align their marketing strategies to capture attention that drives conversion at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think that's a huge challenge. And really, that's where marketing plays its biggest role in terms of the actual creation of content and the design. But quite often, in terms of a product page, we think about the brand and the retailer. So you have a brand that sells on a specific grocer their products. The grocery retailer owns that product page. So they, in fact, depict, what data needs to show and also where does it show within that page. So there'll be a team of people on the retailer side saying, okay, well, we've decided our customer prefers 3 thumbnails and a video. And so we're telling our brands that want to sell with us, you must supply us with that data. Now that constantly changes. So if you think about that at scale, if I'm a global brand with hundreds and thousands of SKUs, how do I then respond quickly enough to every single retailer demand and also adapt my data? So we often think about having a golden record, and that's a term that's often used in PIM. So that's one version of the product in a single schema. But in today's e-commerce world, it's not just a single schema for that product that's served everywhere. So you need to be able to adapt and enrich that content for every channel. And that's where we take it into what we call PXM, or experience management. So that single record is then created into hundreds, thousands of different records for the same product. The brands will have a perception of, how they want to show up to their consumer. So the type of messaging and the tone of voice and the brand image, those are the things the brand controls. How much of it shows on the product page is whoever owns that page. So you'll often find a brand's D2C site and their own product pages has a huge amount more content that might be rich media, A+ content as it's known on Amazon, versus another retailer not showing as much, just showing what they've specifically required. So ownership of brand and demand of retailer is the kind of network play that PIM and PXM starts to play with.
Right. So where does the product content fit in within the overall distribution strategy?
Yeah, so product content is a key component. So if you think about when we shop on a product page, the content that's shown is made up of different components that come from different sources. So the content, I typically see it as two elements. You've got the assets, the digital assets, and you've got the product information, so the text. But within those, you've also got things like ingredients lists or labels or claims. So the amalgamation of what product content is in fact made up of lots of different components, and every business will be different. This is why when you start off on your PIM journey, it's actually quite difficult, because you need to cross collaborate with all of these different teams that own, create, and manage different parts of content that ultimately is making up all the information that you go on to sell it on the digital shelf. And so it's part of the digital shelf strategy. Now, your digital shelf strategy can also be taken from another lens, which is, where do we want to sell? And where what do we target as our channels to sell on? So your digital shelf strategy may include social channels, it may not. There's also thinking about global and market by market presence. So some brands start in one market and they start to launch, and then they've got a challenge that they're growing, then they have to get it out into different markets. And so again, product content needs to be adapted and enriched and changed for the end consumer in that market. So we talk about the consumer and the customer quite often. So the consumer is you and I when we shop online, but the customer is the recipient of that data between us. So that's the retailer or the social media channel. So the strategy needs to involve a lot of different components when it comes to thinking about the content, and what serves the relevant audience that they're looking to sell to.
Right. So when they expand to another market, how do they accommodate regional nuances into the product content?
Yeah, it's a common thing if you think about the amount of global brands that we're so familiar with. So typically what happens is there is a master data record for that product that's created at some point. And that master data will have the key components that you must share about any product. But let's say in a specific market, there's a regulation that means you must declare the source of the packaging material, but that doesn't apply to another market. So there's always this piece where there's extra bits and attributes that need to be added. So what you need to be able to have is a tool that allows you to create multiple product records from a single master product, let's call it. And that's where market by market will have various ownership over their product range and the category they play in order to meet the market needs. The technology capabilities will be critical to supporting them scale that, so that there's less of the manual work that comes into filling out spreadsheets for a specific market. What you want to be able to do is automate more and more of changing that original content into the right language and tone, and adding additional attributes as they're required for each market. So that's one of the key capabilities of a PXM system. It takes PIM into that world of enrichment of the content for each and every market or each and every customer that they're really thinking about serving.
Nice. So there are these nice to have digital shelf metrics and the ones that you must have. What according to you are those KPIs that a brand must have? I mean, it would vary depending on, what is the size of the brand, and a lot of details go into that. So
Yeah, so typically, like as brands go through their maturity and they're measuring success with anything to do with digital shelf, if they're thinking about it primarily when they launch a system, they're often thinking about, okay, so how many SKUs are onboarded into this product information system? How many users are using the system? So what is the adoption of the tool across the business? Um, how many channels are we syndicating to? Are we getting our content out to each and every channel? So those are quite quantifiable metrics when it comes to the technology side. But when we think about measurable goals holistically for product content, there's a couple of ways that I often advise clients to think about it. So you've got your internal metrics. So those are the ones where you think about, okay, for employees and our partners, what does that content need to be like? So we think about it as accessible. So, can we get to it? Where is it living? Is it in a central source? Compliant, huge thing to remain compliant and meet the regulatory needs. Measurable. So how easy is it for that data to be continually improved? And we'll get to digital shelf analytics in a moment, but also adaptable. So we just talked about this. So we want to measure, can we say, okay, it's really adaptable, both quantitatively and qualitatively across different geographies? So that's our internal metrics. We're thinking about the platform, how the data looks to us as internal, as a business functionally. And then we go and we start to think external measurements. So for our consumers and customers, is it trusted? Is it available? Is it complete? How often have you been on a product page where you're like, well, I just can't see an image of, the back of this dress. And so I need to go somewhere else to better understand this product. And consistency is another metric that's often thought about. So how often is our brand showing up the same everywhere it's sold, or do we see vast differences across all our touch points? So we talk about digital shelf, but ultimately the digital shelf is an extension of the physical shelf. The way your product shows up when you go and browse the aisles of Walmart or Target should be the same way it shows up when you look on the product page. And that's a very hard thing to measure, but consistency is aided again by the kind of workflows that technology allows you to check content. So when you marry together the internal and the external metrics or KPIs that can be in place for the content itself, the output should be best in class quality content that drives growth and impacts conversion, being a kind of an ultimate goal of the business. Without doing that, you pose risks of potential pain points and repercussions for the business. So you can also, look at quantifiable risks as well as measurements of positivity.
definitely. So if you have to put it in one word, what would be that message you have for brand manufacturers to kind of have their product content optimized in 2025?
I would say program. So the reason I say program is it has to configure around tech, people, process, and data. So if you talk about product content in isolation without it coming as a full strategy that the business is bought into, you'll find yourself struggling to scale it without the right components in place. So I often keep saying, okay, so is there a program? Is there a program owner? Is there a consistent ambition and definition of product content in the business? And are you all working towards the same goal? And how are you doing that with the right people, etc.?
Well, that's such a nice message, Carla. We've come to the end of the session, and thank you so much for joining us. And it was such a nice conversation with you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Shreshta. I'm actually going to be releasing a white paper later this week on the exact topic. So it gives readers a little bit more to dig into around thinking about the right operating model and program for product content.
Right. And we'll also leave those links in the description box below.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. We've come to the end of the episode. If you loved what you just listened to, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back next Monday with a really awesome guest. Stay tuned until then.